Everybody is a psychic and is a medium. It's just that culture, time, patriarchy, colonization, all these things have separated us from something that's really our birthright. There was a time when people who maybe exhibited some of these abilities would have been honored by their community, would have been supported by their community, would have been healers in their community, and it wouldn't have been considered woo woo or weird, or it was just would have been a normal thing to support individuals and to support each other.
Welcome to the Soul Sesh podcast, where we dive into deep and soulful conversations with guests from all around the world about what it means to live a fully expressed and free life. I'm your host, Aaliyah, and I'm so excited to go on this journey with you. So let's dive in. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of the Soul Sesh podcast. I just want to begin by saying thank you so much for being here, whether this is your first conversation that you're joining in on or whether you are a regular. It has been such a joy these past few weeks as we've launched this next season of Soul Sesh to really dive into these beautiful conversations and to share these stories with you. And I'm really excited for today's conversation. We're sitting down with Emily O'Neill for what I imagine is going to be a very spiritual, witchy type of conversation. And there's going to be a lot of medicine. Emily and I have been chatting a little bit before we hit record, and she is such an intuitive, brilliant soul. Her ability to feel into spaces and people and just read energy is something that is quite incredible in from what I've experienced being in Emily's environment and aura over these last few years now. We connected about 2 years ago. So, yeah, it's going to be a really juicy conversation. So, get yourself nice and comfortable or just tuning in wherever you're at. And we're going to dive into this conversation with Emily O'Neill. Emily is a psychic medium, and she's really passionate about helping others connect to themselves and embrace change. She uses tarot, psychism, intuition, and mediumship to help people understand the energies moving through their lives so that they can gain perspective and insight. And she's developed specific tools to help her clients build a healthy relationship to their intuition and their inner guidance system so that they can take mindful action in their daily life. She believes that tarot is a spiritual practice that extends far beyond fortune telling. And I have a feeling that she's going to have a very different take about tarot and mediumship and psychism. I had to actually Google how to say psychism because that word was a little was a little
Yeah.
tricky, but I feel like she's going to have a very different perspective than perhaps what we hear in social media, on YouTube, just in the field. So, Emily, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation with you.
I'm grateful to be here and for the opportunity.
Yes. So, I want to begin by getting a little background about your story and your journey. And maybe you could begin by sharing how you even got into this world of mysticism with tarot and being a psychic medium and working with intuition and all these incredible tools that you dive into.
It definitely hasn't been a straight line. Um, I guess I would say that I grew up in a household where I had a mother who, if I had questions like maybe I knew something before it happened, or I sensed things or became aware of things, that would be she was very supportive of that. And she often had like new age spirituality books laying around, lots of books about intuition and things like that. So as a kid, if I had a question, she'd be like, "Oh, I have a book on that." She was raised Catholic, which is kind of interesting, but as you know, the holidays would come, she'd always tell us what the real holiday was, like underneath all of like Christmas or Halloween. She'd be like, oh, actually, that has roots, in paganism and things like that. And would always kind of connect it to the cycles of nature and the wheel of the year, and which was interesting to me because I thought she was Catholic, so as a kid I'm like, but I
Mhm.
thought you're Catholic when you're telling me all this other stuff. So she was really kind of supportive of that, but I don't know that people really understood the degree to which I was absorbing information. I don't think I understood it either. I thought some of the things like just being able to be around somebody and pick up on information was normal. I didn't know that
Mm.
and it is normal. I don't want to make it sound like it's not. Everybody has is a psychic and is a medium. It's just that culture, time, patriarchy, colonization, all these things have separated us from something that's really our birthright. And most of us have in our lineage, there's some kind of practice around being a seer or psychism or mediumship. It might not be called that, but it's pretty common and prevalent throughout the world in every culture. And there was a time when people who maybe exhibited some of these abilities would have been honored by their community, would have been supported by their community, would have been healers in their community, and it wouldn't have been considered woo woo or weird, or it was just would have been a normal thing to support individuals and to support each other. And there are a lot of reasons, why that's not the case anymore. And I think that you could look to history for that. But, so for me, it was just an unfolding over time. I did study history, anthropology, archaeology, art, all of those things, and did not work as a psychic or medium until really in the last 3 years, and began doing it during the pandemic. But it was just a, a natural unfolding. And I think that I really knew, like, oh, you have a skill and ability that's really developed when I began working one on one with people during the pandemic. So it's not like and I have had mentors, teachers, and people that have helped me develop my skills and abilities. I think that that's important to note. Some people say, "Oh, you're gifted." It's like, well, I don't have gifts. I have skills that I've cultivated over time. So it's not
Mm.
some magical, mystical thing that was just bestowed on me. I happen to have some people over the course of my life that helped me understand and cultivate this very specific skill. And I'm still developing, and I'm still having people help me do it, because you're never done with that. And that's um, something that I'm really passionate about, is not just developing my psychism, mediumship, whatever, but helping other people realize you have access to this tool, and it's actually just like a practical life tool that can help you with regular normal normal things. And it's not really about predicting the future, although we can know certain things before they happen. It's more about, I'm aware of certain things. How can I take that on board and have a little bit more ease in my life, have a little bit more compassion for other people, and have a little bit more compassion for myself? And so
Mm.
um, it's not as airy fairy maybe as it comes off on social media, where people talk about certain things. I tend to take a very grounded, practical, even methodical approach to engaging these kind of tools.
Did you ever feel a sense of shame or self judgment around really leaning into these skills of yours?
Well, I don't know that I felt so much shame as not seen or understood or appreciated.
Mm.
So, particularly as I kind of stepped forward, started a business, and began working with, directly with people, as this is, my profession, I became aware of people thinking their thoughts about it, having their own thoughts and opinions about what it is and what I was doing. And like one thing that comes to my mind is when I would go to events or have to go to different things with my partner and people would ask me what I did and I would tell them, they would just be like, "What?" Like, what do you do again?" and be kind of dismissive of it. And I've had to learn to just to own it and to not be shy about it, and to, and there are some people who think, that I'll go to hell, like I'm going to go to hell for it. So but I just have to be me and do me. So not so much shame, but definitely feeling like it's hard to find my people sometimes, for sure, and to be
Absolutely.
like understood, like deeply understood, and having appreciation for what I do, because it's a little bit of a lonely road, and it's a path that is not for the faint of heart. The big things come up. I have to have very difficult conversations with people, if they sometimes in sessions when they come to me, and um, having the ability to handle that, and to be able to let things go when I'm not working with people. Like if something comes up when it's our time is done, like being able to like let it go and not carry it with me. So there's a lot going on, for sure.
There's a thread that I'm curious about. You mentioned that your mom was raised Catholic. For someone who maybe grew up in a highly religious environment
Mm.
where they felt like their spiritual expression could only be expressed in one particular way or according to one particular set of rules, and maybe
Okay.
that didn't always feel resonant to them, but they
Yes.
feel like spiritual on some level.
Hmm.
Do you have any thoughts or anything come
Yeah.
through about helping someone in that space kind of find their own path and break free
Yes.
of maybe what religion taught them but
Mhm.
doesn't feel necessarily resonant?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So as a kid, I actually had access to a lot of different religions. I went to the Mormon church, Presbyterian, Methodist, some Catholic services. So I really was sorry. These things keep slipping off my. I have a tiny head. These are, I really do, and nothing ever fits it. So the headset keeps slipping off. I'm sorry about that.
You're
So
good.
it was really different because my family was like, try it out, see how you feel. Like it's fine. My dad is an atheist. But so I came across in my time a lot of people who grew up in a kind of strict, maybe strict is a heavy word, but strong religious beliefs, a lot of dogma and stuff there. And I can certainly understand that perspective. And the thing that I have always returned to, and that has always been my guiding light, is something actually I was just meditating on yesterday and did some writing about, which is divine love or universal love. And that's something that is not separate from us. So if people think it must pour into us from some external separate, so it's not separate from us, it's inside of us. We were born from that. Whether your parents loved each other or love you, it doesn't matter. You come from love, you were born from that, and that's where you will return when you die. And so accessing that has been probably the most powerful thing, the most powerful part of my spiritual practice and just my personal care practices, is recognizing that I'm loved no matter what, because I'm me. I don't have to beg, borrow, or steal to receive that love. And I know that I have access to that love anytime I wish. Now, we all have barriers to that, right? Like things have happened. Life is hard. Life happens. And sometimes that we shield ourselves, I think, from things. We shield ourselves from the vulnerability that love requires. And I understand that. And so I know that some people might kind of even roll their eyes at a statement like having access to universal love, because they think, well, I don't feel that right now. Fair enough. Like I've had times where I certainly didn't, but I think that that's been my guiding principle and my guiding light. And through developing my, particularly my mediumistic abilities, that's how that became even more true for me, because love is the tie that binds and it doesn't die. It never dies. So we may pass on, but our love will always remain. And that's when it kind of sunk in on a whole nother level, that this like universal love is the way, is our way, or can be something that opens us up to the divine, and we're divine. So that's the other thing I always like to say, is like the divine is not something else. It's you. It's us. It's the trees, it's the rocks, it's the food that you eat, and water. And I also always feel like we're not separate, just like we're not separate from divine love, we're not separate from nature. We're part of nature. Um, and this illusion of separateness, I think, is something that sometimes religion perpetuates, the separateness, um, that you have to ask to be forgiven, just different things around access to heaven, for example, and things like that. So that might sound simple, but I know for people who come from certain backgrounds that that is not simple, and that's kind of complicated.
It is. It really is. And I think I'm actually curious as a follow-up to that of what are your thoughts on how we can build a stronger relationship with the divine within us and outside of us? How do we really strengthen and kind of feel or be able to trust that divinity that's within?
It's definitely a process of unfolding. And I really like to borrow the phrase from a spiritual person who I've read his works for a long time. His name is John O'Donohue. He was actually an Irish priest, but I would say that he was also a mystic, and certainly a very spiritual person. And he calls it, in almost in many different ways throughout all of his very wonderful books, a coming home to yourself, like a constant unfolding of certain layers to come home to yourself. And whatever that looks like for you is fine. But I think it's being able to be present with what is as it is in any given moment. So if in the moment things don't feel so good, letting things not feel so good, and not thinking that everything needs to be fixed right now. And that again sounds really simple, but it's really hard to sit with discomfort. That's a practice. And over time, I think we become more aware of the different parts of ourselves. We're not one thing, right? I'm spiritual, but I'm also lots of other things as well. And being able to acknowledge when certain aspects of who we are coming forward. So I can be mean. I can say things I wish I wouldn't say. I can certainly have anger and fear, and those things come up. I'm not perfect. And that's okay. So I think that returning to love, or finding your way to that, it's a practice of being present and allowing your experiences to inform your perceptions. Like that might sound kind of weird, but and that your perceptions on things will change all the time. You know what I mean? You don't ever get to lock in and be like, I figured it out. Yep, I'm settled. This is what I think and believe. Although when I was younger, I totally did that. I was like, oh, good. I think I've settled on a belief system that feels good to me. And then it would, obviously, life will be like, oh, yeah, you think you figured it out? Well, whoop, bloop, never mind.
Honestly, I feel like this is so timely because something in my own life that I've really been investigating is the difficulty of sitting with the discomfort and noticing the ways that personally for me I can distract or numb myself from feeling that discomfort or pain,
Yeah.
and becoming very honest with myself about what I'm turning to in those moments when the emotions feel really intense, or when I feel so much uncertainty and I don't
Hmm.
know what's coming, which is all of the time. And
Yeah.
finding, again, like you said, that coming back to that state of presence and just being with it is so much harder than it sounds.
Yeah. And I always tell people, be gentle with yourself. If you need to dissociate or use a crutch, or you have certain behaviors that, are kind of self-soothing, that's fine. That's fine.
Mm.
Do it. At some point over time, you'll acknowledge that you're doing it and why you're doing it. You put the pieces together, and you may not want to do it anymore. But like one
Yeah.
thing I do is, sometimes I just feel overwhelmed, and I'll scroll for like an hour on TikTok and look at random, mostly cat video. There's a lot of cat videos because that's soothing. And I'm like, oh my God, an hour went by. But I think, I kind of needed that. So, I mean,
Mm.
sometimes, but then, it can swing, right, right. Things can always swing to extremes. But I always say, let's be gentle with ourselves, because like we are human beings, and we have to function in a very real world that requires certain things, and those things can be stress inducing, you know and sometimes we just need, to rely on certain things, and that's fine. Not to be, not like, don't beat ourselves up about it. I think that, though, we have all seen people that take dealing with challenging times and enact behaviors to an extreme. But one of the other areas that I really, really enjoy focusing on in sessions is what's motivating a behavior. So
Mm.
looking at that with curiosity, so it's like, oh, when I did that thing where I like zoned out on social media for an hour, what motivated that? Like, what happened? What was going on that day? Because usually before any thought or any action, there's a feeling. There's the feeling comes first. And I don't know about you, but I'm really good at emotionally bypassing. Like,
Mm.
something will come up, and I'll just like go right around it, and I'll maybe create a narrative, a thoughts, like, oh, you feel this way because, but that's not feeling the feeling. And I'll just kind of go around it and then do the behavior, or come up with the whole thought structure that's going to house the situation. And then now I'm sort of like, something was going on before all that happened. What was it? And sometimes I can figure that out on my own, but I have, my therapist, my people that help me understand what's going on there for myself. But it's the mind is a very interesting thing, and it
It is.
steps in to help us to like survive, to like make it. Like, you're gonna, you know, to help us feel more okay. We'll come up with a whole system, a whole structure. It's crazy.
It's so crazy. And honestly, literally yesterday, I was doing some research into my North Node. My North Node is
Yeah.
in Pisces. And
Ah.
yeah, so for me, this lifetime is very much about leaning into spirituality. And something that this video was talking about on YouTube was that a trap that people with North Node and Pisces, and for anyone who's unfamiliar with what the North Node is, it's a placement in your birth chart, which is basically denotes your purpose in this lifetime. And so, where your North Node is the direction that your soul is calling you to move towards. And then, directly opposed to your North Node is your South Node, which is
Mhm.
energies that you've mastered in prior lifetimes. So, you've come into this life having mastered and feeling very comfortable with your South Node. And you're being asked to move beyond that comfort towards your North. So with my
Mhm.
North Node in Pisces, my South Node is in Virgo. And this video was very interestingly talking about how a trap that South Node Virgos can fall into is doing all the reading about spirituality and reading all the books and taking all the courses and, learning all the things. But that's still not practical spirituality. It's not about the lesson, like what you're learning or intellectualizing, but it's
Mhm.
about just how you're being and like experientially experiencing spirituality. And that was such a light bulb moment for me because I just cannot even tell you like how many times or like hours I've spent reading or researching or taking courses thinking that that's bringing
Mhm.
me closer when actually it was still in my mind. It wasn't actually the experience of spirit. So that
Yeah.
was really powerful what you shared right now.
Oh, I like that your North Node is in Pisces. That makes sense to me. You'll never guess where
Really?
mine is. You'll just never
Virgo?
guess. Heck no, it's in Leo.
Ooh, I love that.
No, I was like, whoa, North Node in Leo, because I am not. That's a stretch for me, the Leo stuff. So, anywho's, that tickles me that you're a Pisces, and I love Pisces energy personally. I have a lot of Leos in my life, but it sort of I had to chuckle when I found that out about myself. I was like, oh geez, no wonder. But to your point about the practical spirituality and kind of connecting to your spiritual self, right? And what things mean for you. I love Mark Nepo's The Book of Awakening because he has every day he has a little short blurb that he writes. They're very potent, and then at the end he has like these little things that you can do. They're very meditative. Very, I mean, I'm sure it has Buddhist, yogic. Their roots in Eastern spirituality would is what my sense is. I'm pretty sure that's the case, and they can be really nice prompts for getting people to connect with themselves, and what's going on with them. They could be their journal prompts, but they're also like one time he's like, sit under a tree and just like feel the tree. And I was like, oh, not a problem. So sometimes they're kind of more academic than others. But the other thing I would say is I've used tarot for that. Tarot as a
Mm.
spiritual practice is something that I really believe. And for myself, on the new moons and the full moons, I always pull cards, and you may know this, and I generate an intention and affirmation. I share that like on my website and in my newsletter, but that's for me. It's just for me. It's my practice. And I like to work with the cycles of the moon because it makes me realize how quickly time passes, how things shift very, very quickly, because we tend to think nothing's happening, but things are happening all the time. And so, my way to kind of understand my spiritual self or connect with the divine was just to pull a couple of cards and, not look up anything in books, but just really let them reveal themselves to me. One of the things I believe is that when you pull a card, it's a reflection of you, right? It's a part of you. It's representing you. So if you pull something that's weird and you're like, I don't know what that means, there's probably something there for you, like something to discover that you're not aware of. So that's one way that I've used um, these tools to explore myself and to continue to be curious and to continue to uncover parts of myself I may not be aware of, or um, to just learn, um, to keep learning and to keep growing and to keep evolving. And um, nothing is ever really set in stone. And I think that that's one thing that spiritually working with the moon cycles and having practices, whatever they are, around that has been really profound because time moves pretty quickly.
I think that this is a perfect segue into tarot. And I'm curious if you could share, maybe for anyone who's unfamiliar or maybe
Mhm.
has like a preconceived notion of what tarot cards are, maybe just
Yeah.
sharing a little bit about what it is and
Yeah.
how do we use it for self-discovery and self-care?
Well, it's interesting because the origins of tarot, there are lots of ideas, but nobody really knows for sure. We just know, I think it's either the 14th or 15th century. I know tarot gurus will correct me if I'm wrong. Somewhere around there, I can't remember which. Um, uh, a wealthy Italian family, I think, commissioned a deck, and so the deck was created. And um, I'm definitely simplifying, but that's the gist of it. And it was a game called Tarocchi, and people used it as just kind of a parlor game. Our modern playing deck comes from the tarot. So four
Oh,
suits. Yeah, yeah, there's four suits in each, and minus the trump cards. But so that's the 22 major arcana cards, which are the big archetypes. So, and then eventually it kind of became a divination tool. And then we had like the big mass production of the Tarot des Messias out of France. So that's when it really started spreading because they could mass produce these decks. And then it kind of became this common thing. There's also divination cards called Lenormand cards. I think they're more popular in Europe, but it's 36 cards instead of 78. But it started out as a game and then became a divination tool. So it has 78, tarot has 78 cards. There's 22 that are called the major arcana, and the remainder are the minor arcana. And it just tells the story of life. And I like to think of it as every card can represent a part of you or an aspect of you or something kind of going on in your life. And there are lots of different ways to engage the tool, and different kinds of ways you can use tarot spreads and different things. It's definitely a skill, but I prefer to read intuitively, and I think it's important to make that distinction. There are other kinds of readers who I would call academic readers who have studied all of the mysticism. It's usually Christian mysticisms. There's probably, I think there's like some Kabbalah stuff in there. I am not an academic reader. I do not study the tarot in that way. I don't want to. But there are readers that do that. And then there are kind of readers like me that read intuitively. They've learned to connect with the cards and their intuition. So somebody might say a card means X to them. It might mean something different to me. It doesn't really matter because they're dynamic. They don't mean one thing. They have personalities and a spectrum of existence and a spectrum of expression depending on what's going on. And I think that's another thing people don't understand. They're used to, well, I pulled this card, I looked it up in the book, and this is what it means, but that doesn't make sense to me. And I'm like, that's because the card's not one dimensional. It doesn't have one meaning. We can go way beyond keywords and things like that. So I use it intuitively. I think it's easier to learn it intuitively. And personally, I've had academic readings and intuitive readings, and I'd much prefer an intuitive reading over a more academic one, but everybody has their preferences. I hope that kind of answers the question to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you're reading the cards intuitively, is it a matter of trusting what you feel or what comes through? Like how does one
Yeah.
begin the journey of
That's
even reading
yeah.
intuitively?
That's a good question. So the technique that I recommend, that was recommended to me by my mentor in the tarot, whose name is Sally Dubats, and she lives here in Vancouver, Washington. She, I think this might be a Jungian psychological tool. I'm not 100% sure, but one of the things that I always offer to people is to just pull a card and write down everything that you see using there are statements. So I pulled the Empress, like there's a woman, she has a swelling belly, there's wheat at her feet. Like you just write down everything that you see till you're tired of it. And when you think you can't write down anything more, you write down more. Like you kind of push yourself a little bit. And then when you're done with that, turn those statements that are there are or I see into I am. And then it's sort of like I'm these things. And then you build this, like it's like you embody it. We were like, whoa, I understand Empress vibe now. Because it's going to mean different things to everybody. And I think it's really important to note that um, not all of the archetypes in the tarot you're going to relate to or like. The example I use is like the Emperor, and in the traditional Smith Waite deck, it's a old white man with the white beard sitting on a throne. Yuck. Like who wants you know what I mean? Like who wants another old white man bossing them around, right? So I had a hard time kind of coming to neutral with that archetype because I would see it and I'd be like, oh, that makes me think of every man that's ever tried to control me, basically.
Mm.
Yucky, I don't want that. So you have to find neutral with the archetypes, and I think that's an important thing because then we'll put our bias on top of it. But it's really not as hard as you would think to learn the cards intuitively. And I, when I teach this to people, I actually teach them in groups called I call them card constellations, where I'll actually group certain ones together because there are themes and things that you can see, and we'll kind of do that exercise in clustered, and it so you don't learn the cards one by one, you kind of learn them in these constellations. So it's not as difficult as a process as maybe people might think. Does it take time? Yeah. Would you have to carve out a little time every day if you wanted to learn it? Yeah, just like anything. Like if you want to learn to play the piano, you have to practice, but it's actually really fun. And if it's just part of your journaling practice or your spiritual practice, right? Like how I'll pull them and just kind of see what comes up, you'll eventually come into quite a relationship with your deck
Mm.
over time. And you'll I don't know, when I don't you engage my practice, I certainly feel it. But there are a
You
lot
feel
of
the
ways to
effects in
learn.
your life?
Yeah, I feel like kind of like stopped up. Like when I
Mm.
don't do my journaling and spiritual practices with the tools, I feel like creatively like I'm not in flow or something like that. It really has become a keystone kind of aspect of my personal care practices.
Mm. It's so interesting because I felt a pull to tarot about 2 years ago,
Mhm.
and I bought a deck, or my sister gifted me a deck, and I went down kind of an academic approach
Mhm.
of like looking at like getting this course and beginning to like take notes and whatever. And I was just so overwhelmed by it.
Yes.
Like, I was like, geez, this is like a master's degree to like really learn and like remember all of these facets of each card. And so I kind of put that away. And my confession that I wanted to confess to you, although I think you already know this, is that I'm actually like a huge YouTube tarot watcher.
Mhm.
And I like that's actually part of my like weekly practices to watch
Mhm.
some of my favorite readers
Mhm.
about, general readings on like Pisces, or I have a Gemini
Mhm.
moon, so sometimes I watch that. And I know you've expressed on your socials that a little bit of discontent with
Mhm.
general tarot readings,
Mhm.
and how I'm even starting to realize the potential dangers of that through our conversation right now. But I'd love to hear
Mhm.
from you of
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on like these general readings, or like this huge popularity of
Mhm.
tarot in like this very general way over YouTube
Yeah.
and social media?
Well, no, first looping back to learning tarot, if you are curious, I want to start, I'll give you some places to start. You can email them too, and they're fun. It's fun, it's more playful. And you don't have to study. It'll just be fun. I'll give you some ideas. The reason that so first of all, like I used to watch all of those collective tarot readings too. And then I was like, why am I doing this? What is it bringing into my life? How likely is that message actually for me? What's the point? Like, what is this
Mm,
doing? And I realized it's not doing anything for me. I was like, this is not offering me anything. They're very general, they're very generic. And I feel like, there may be some times in there where something really resonates with you, where somebody says something and you're like, whoa, I needed to hear that. Good on you. Like, take it on board. That's definitely pay attention to what your body and your intuition is telling you about that stuff. But I mean, I feel like people do that to because they want to get a social media following. They don't really know how else to maybe engage or demonstrate the use of tarot, or how tarot can be used other than pulling out their cards and saying, "Hey, this is a collective energy reading, and here's what's coming up." Um, it just I don't think, if people like doing it, I'm not want to bring any shame or anything to that. It's just not for me, and you won't see me doing it. You know what
mm,
I mean? Like, if you need to have somebody support you in that way, I think the best thing for you to do is to find a, a well-developed, ethical reader and get
mm.
a reading. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
just go and get a reading. There's a fine line between preying on people's fears and insecurities and pain. And I do think it's different when somebody's live and they're working with somebody one on one. If you consent to doing it in public and you want to have a reading, I do think that's something that can be done ethically. But I don't know. I feel like the collective readings tend to be very, I mean, broad in general. And I am a process oriented person that actually work for a long time in like the technical industry and IT and IS and healthcare. So I'm very practical. And so I'm like, statistically, that's probably, you know what I mean? Like what's the probability of this very vague message that has angel numbers all like three all over it being really like for me?
Right.
It's this the odds are not really not really there, and I don't know what people are tapping into when they're giving these messages. I just don't. I think that I have seen people do it where here's the message that's coming through, take it or leave it. Like that's fine. I think that's, like I think the tarot lady does these 6-second tarot readings where she'll pull a card and she'll be like, this is the message of the day. And then, you can kind of like maybe take that in as an affirmation or something to see if it resonates with you and apply it through your day. Like, okay, but yeah, I know I'm not the norm on that. And people, I think, might not like that. My sense is people don't like that stance so much because it challenges a norm. But that's definitely how I feel about it. And um, but a lot of people make a lot of money and get a lot of followers from doing it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you are so different from any tarot reader that I follow, and I actually I follow quite a bit, but you are
Yeah.
like 100% so different from anyone, and your guidance is always guiding people back to themselves. Like you'll say like these are the messages that I pulled for the full moon, like how does it relate in your own life? Like these are the
Mhm,
questions you can journal on and think
mhm.
about in relation to your own life. And something that is actually honestly coming through from our conversation relating back to what I shared about the North Node is perhaps me watching all of these tarot readers is just another way that I'm intellectualizing my own connection to spirit rather than
Mhm,
going to the cards myself and,
mhm.
developing that intuitive relationship with the cards like you're saying.
'Cause
And
you know what they mean. You do. We do. People
mm,
do. They do you look at them, those images, it's just like looking at a piece of art. It really is.
mm,
We react to art, right? We feel. We know what these things mean. A lot of the symbolism is pretty old. It's been
mm,
around for a long time. And so we don't necessarily need people telling us what it all means because inherently I think a lot of from the people that I've taught tarot, they're like, "Whoa, I didn't realize I really knew that." I'm like, "But you did. But you did. You did know. You do know. It's there. It's something that we do all have access to. It's symbolic imagery." And there's this really cool book, I think it's called The Creative Explosion, that talks about the point in time, I don't remember the date, but it was way a long time ago, where across the globe people started making those the ancient cave paintings. That's it,
mm,
like that sacred imagery, right? And symbolic imagery. So we've been using symbolic imagery forever in all cultures. So what is a tarot card? Symbolic imagery. We
mm,
have direct access to kind of an understanding of that because of just human consciousness, I think. And it we overcomplicate things, and I think people. I certainly understand people like kind of having blocks or a little getting in their own way a little bit, but you'd be surprised. The other thing I'll say is like if you ever have a hard time with your tarot deck, maybe you don't like it.
mm,
Maybe that's not the deck for you. Because I had one person come to a event. We were doing a tarot reading room where people of all levels would come and I gave them a little spread and they would read because that's really how you come to know it is by reading for yourself and for others. And there's no better way than to read for another person. It's very exciting and people are always so scared. I'm like, no, you can do it. And she had this deck and she's like, I love the art on this deck. And she pulled the cards out and she was like, this doesn't mean anything to me. So I took her deck away and I gave her this other deck and put out the exact same cards, but just with this other deck. And she just started reading. She was like, bam, bam, bam. I was like, see, sometimes it's the deck. Sometimes that, and she was like, oh, I just thought kind of like the style and the art of it, but she's like, I'm realizing now that I don't have like that soul connection to this deck. Like I can't read from it. And I'm like, yeah. So
Mm.
a lot of people, that's the first hump is like maybe they've picked a deck and it's not communicating with them. Like they don't feel that connection with it. A lot of people don't like the traditional Smith Waite deck.
That's the
Like
one I have.
they don't want to work with that one. That's I've had mine since I was 19, so I have it's my baby, but I don't always read from that deck. I read from other decks cuz you might have a visceral reaction to certain imagery and things like that. But um so I always offer that to people like maybe you just haven't found your deck.
Hmm.
Cuz that's a real
That's
thing.
I've heard that, and then I also heard that's why I actually got my sister to gift me a tarot deck
Mhm.
because I heard that your tarot deck needs to be gifted.
Now,
I'm sure that's like complete bullshit, but I was
no,
like,
you can
you
just
gotta give
you
it's
buy
my
whatever
birthday.
deck
I
you
want
want. Yeah, you do whatever you want. You can buy
Yeah.
yourself any deck that you want, and something that's really fun is mixing tarot and oracle cards. That's really
Mm,
fun. Not to like add another layer of complexity, but you can mix decks. You can do whatever the hell you want. It's
yeah.
fine. It's all good. And I mean, eventually, what happened to me after working with tarot and I used to just give intuitive tarot readings to people, but over time I've gotten to the point where I don't need any cards. I don't need any tools. I get my intuit like it helped me build a really good intuition with my clair senses, my other than five senses. So claircognizance, clairvoyance, all those things. And I realized, oh, people come, I already know what's going on. I don't even need to use cards anymore. And then from that's when I realized I was also a medium because in sessions when I was using the cards less, I kind of I never thought I was a medium. I really didn't think I could do that. I accidentally made a link to somebody, a
Mm.
spirit person, and then they were like, "Oh, Em, that's somebody that's not alive, and you're bringing information." I was like, "No, I don't know how to do that. Like, I don't do that." And they were like, "No, you're doing it."
Wow.
And that's when I realized for that I needed to get development, which is why I go to the Oakbridge Institute to help with my mediumistic development because I don't know anything about mediumship until, this last year. But one byproduct of engaging in intuitive tarot practice is you will wake up your intuitive self. Just will.
Mm.
It just will happen. And that comes with kind of a whole other set of things. Like every piece of information that I get, does it require action? No, you don't have to do anything with information that you pick up on or you receive. You can just know it and let it go. Um, and then having like ethics and boundaries around, it's not a good idea to run up to people and be like, "Oh, I'm getting this information on you," because they didn't consent to that. The consent is a really important part of the process and stuff. So, and no, psychics and mediums don't walk around being tapped in all the time, knowing everything about people. That's a myth. Like we when we're on, we're on. When we're off, we're off, and um,
So
that's
that's something that you can gauge when you can be on when you want to be on and you can turn it off when you want to be off?
absolute 100%. Yeah, I mean, can you imagine how stressful and draining it would be to walk around in a completely open and receptive state all the time? Oh my god.
Yeah.
There's just no way. So I think that's another maybe thing that would people would be interested to know is that when people are working psychically, mediumistically, or even engaging divination tools, whatever they are, over time or with development and training and understanding, you expand your awareness. You learn to expand your awareness, and your kind of thinking mind goes here, and then your energetic self kind of expands out, and so does your awareness, and that's how kind of information will come into you. It's not a thinking mind type of a thing. So that requires being in a passive state and a B receptive state. So being very passive and being very receptive, which means kind of being a little there. Like if you're a control freak, that's going to be hard to do because it makes you feel vulnerable. So
Mm.
usually you want to work in that way in a place where you feel safe, secure, held, and supported. So, but yeah, you don't want to be in that state all the time, it would be hard to sustain that for a really long time. And for me, putting my that level of awareness to, I call it putting it to bed. It's like I kind of think of it as I draw my sword when I'm working, and then I sheathe my sword when I'm done. And then I go about my day, and it's a practice. But one of the tools I've developed, that I have there for free on my website, is the 6-part check-in process, which kind of is a way for people to pause and check in with themselves, but it also expands their awareness, and it does, and eventually with consistent practice around it, help them realize more about their intuitive abilities and their intuitive self, and understanding like those boundaries that you want to have with it. Like, um, I don't like to say rules, but like knowing where you need to have your boundaries. Your way isn't going to be my way. It's going to be different because we're different people. We function differently. So helping people understand what that looks like for them. Um, I don't know about you, but I didn't have people that modeled any of this for me. Not
Yeah.
until in the last really year with my mediumship development, I had to kind of learn it the hard way, which is why this is something that I'm so passionate about. Because there's a lot going on the interwebs, and there's just a lot going on in the metaphysical community and things like that. And some of it's great. A lot of it I question, which I think is a healthy thing to do. And we don't have a lot of people modeling just, I think, how this could be in a way that feels kind and supportive and compassionate, and doesn't involve spiritual or emotional bypassing, or um, one of the things that it can do a lot of harm, is what I'm trying to say. Like, people, it, a lot of harm has been done to me, I know, from absorbing some of that stuff, and I'm very cognizant that I do not want to do harm to others by saying like,
Mm.
oh, manifest this. Like, I'm very, well, manifestation or just some of these other things, I think we have to be careful about some of that stuff.
Yeah.
So I am different. You're right. And it's been a lonely road. It's not been easy, because it would just be easy to go with what everybody else has been doing. But that's not what I've been guided to do from, my inner light, and from my connection to universal love, and to, how that just hasn't been my journey. And that's why I say it can be lonely. It can be very, kind of a lonely road, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I think it's better to question things than to just like be like, oh, that's the norm, so that must be what I need to be doing. Can you tell that I'm an Aquarius? Being like,
Aquarius with the Leo North Node. I'm like seeing that connection a little bit now, and I
yeah,
really want to celebrate your courage, because it is really hard to be against the grain in a culture where, there's so much emphasis that it's supposed to be a certain way.
yeah,
So it's amazing that, like, you, first of all, that you have the awareness, I want to say maybe the skill or the ability to tap in and to feel and hear what's true to you, and then to have the courage to really follow through on that, because it's not an easy path, like you said.
no. And I will say this, that quality or that characteristic is kind of part of my personality type, but I think it's also deliberate. And I want to say that again, it's a quality that has helped me with my psychism and my mediumship in particular, because guess what happens when you're in that state and you're getting information? Weird things
Mm.
come to you, and you have to be able to just say it. You have to kind of put yourself out there and say, okay, this is kind of the information that I'm getting. And so having like being a little brave and having the strength and the courage to say things that don't make sense to me but might make sense to you kind of falls in line with that quality of, um, kind of having to put yourself out there in your own way all the time. Like, every time I'm in mediumship development, I'm not doing it with the public yet, because I want to make sure that I provide a high standard of care and that I've got the skills. um, as my development's going really good though, but one of the things is like you really things come to you and you just have to say it and it won't make sense to me because it's not for me. It's for
Mm.
whoever my sitter is. And so it's definitely strengthened my ability to be like, well, I just need to do what I need to do, I guess,
Yeah.
to honor spirit, to honor the craft, and to honor like the work. And it does require doing your personal work, if that makes sense. Like I have to do deconstruct things within myself all the time, and I'm constantly humbled. I
Mm.
and I just have to be okay with that. Like constantly be like, you have some learning to do all the time and not have shame around making mistakes, and not worry about taking ownership of them if you make them.
Could you explain for anyone who's unfamiliar what mediumship is and what psychism is?
That's a really good question because there's kind of three things. Like there's right tarot readings, which we talked about. There's intuitive and academic, right? Your tarot reader may or may not be psychic. Okay. And then you
Mm.
have people that are psychic and they may also be a tarot reader, right? And then you have mediumship. So it is a little convoluted. So for the purposes of answering that question, I'm going to kind of take tarot and divination off the table for a second. And we'll look at psychism and mediumship. So psychism is when I have a sitter and I'm the psychic and I'm connecting with your energy and I'm getting information. So it's like a me you thing. And we're vibing and I become passive and receptive. I get the information and I pass it on. Usually
Where
if you're work Mhm.
Just to clarify,
Yeah,
where is the information coming from? Is it like my intuition that you're tapping into, or is it like my
that's
connection
a
to
good
spirit?
question. It's energy. I would
Okay.
say energy. You know how they kind of say everything is energy. It's palpable. It's something I can feel. So it's
Mm.
coming from my clair senses. So which there are many. So these are our other than five senses, which everybody has. It's just some of us haven't paid attention to these other ones that we have. So I'm claircognizant, which means sometimes I just know things. I just know. I just know. I don't know honestly how I know. I just do. Um, and that's where I really have to trust that what the information I get, just say it, because sometimes I'm like, that's weird. Like I don't know what that means, but it's not for me. So I just need to spit it out. Then there's clairsentience. I use clairsentience a lot. Like you experienced that before the call today. Like I could feel in my body your what maybe was going on with you within your feeling body. So it's these feelings that I get. So I could sit with somebody and if they're like there's sadness, I will feel sadness, if that makes sense. And I
Mm.
know it's not mine. So that's clairsentience. There's clairvoyance, which is clear seeing. So you get pictures and images. I'm very careful with my clairvoyance because if it's not connected to a feeling, it could just be my mind making random thoughts. And then, there are many other clairsenses, like clairaudience, where you hear something. Um, and there's clairgustance where there's tasting, there's clairtangents where you hold an object. So there's all these clear
Wow.
senses. There's a lot of them and we all have access to them to varying degrees and can train and build our access to those things. So when I'm working psychically, it's those clear senses that are really coming forward for me and that's how I'm kind of getting that information. Um, it, it's not as cut and dry as this, but with mediumship, it's you, me, and the spirit communicator. So I'll make a link with a deceased loved one on the other side. And I will connect with them. I'll feel them come close to me. Like I can feel them draw near. I can get their essence, so their personality, who they were, and then those other clear senses also start to come in. So it's you and me,
Wow.
and then because you and me are connected, I connect to somebody that's on the other side and then they give me information and then I pass it on. So it's not coming from me and I'm not really working psychically. I'm getting everything from that spirit communicator and I just have to ego and everything has to go way out the way and I just have to become a conduit of that information and that's where it's sort of like a free fall. It's sort of like okay cuz I don't know when that information is going to come or how it's going to come. I just have to trust that it will and spit it out as soon as it comes. Like, I can't hem and haw, I can't doubt, I can't worry. I just have to know I've made the link, let the information flow, and go with that. Sometimes psychism does come into those readings, and sometimes mediumship does bleed into my psychic readings. It's not like, right? It's a spirit. Like, this is energy. So things are not like, but that's overall what it is. I'm actually working on a couple of visual aids to help people understand that, because I don't think people know that not all psychics are mediums, but most mediums are psychics. Like, I haven't met a medium that wasn't psychic as fuck. So, I mean, like, that's just the reality. So, but I started out as a psychic tarot reader, and then it awakened up my mediumship. That may or may not happen for all people. So there definitely is a difference, and people use the terms very loosely. So you have to really pay attention to, if you want to work with a practitioner, that they're clear what their skill and ability is. And hopefully that they've had some development, some, not just like, oh my, there's nothing wrong with this, but like, oh, I come from a long line of healers. That's great. How did they help you develop and learn, like, the ethics and stuff? Because I will admit, it's a bit of a free-for-all in the industry. Like, you just don't know what you're going to get sometimes from different readers. And I'm always building like referral lists of people that I know are like, what they do and how they do it, because not everybody wants to work with me. So I'm like, oh, I know some other people that you might want to work with, that I know and trust, because it is it's pretty wide open in the field of psychism and mediumship. Like, you just don't know what you're going to get, which is, I have mixed feelings about that.
I mean, it's such a good point, because I actually I know people who, in very vulnerable moments in their lives, they've
Yes.
turned to a psychic or a medium
Yes.
and actually got completely taken advantage of. Like,
Yes.
okay, to know more information, you have to pay me like this much money, and, like
No.
withholding, and it's so sad, because the girl I'm thinking of, I did my yoga teacher training with her, and yeah, she was so vulnerable, and it was just a very difficult time in her life, and then this compounded on top of that, something that she thought was going to help her. And I
Didn't.
think that can be very traumatic for people. So what are some things that people should look out for in finding
Well,
someone who
definitely
is
that. If anybody
ethical?
reaches out to you for a reading, no. The answer is
Mm,
no one's gonna, that's a professional, is gonna reach out to you and say that they felt anything about what's going on in your life. So that's a hard
mm,
no. I would also say that really look to see if they have testimonials, and if they can articulate what their background is, and if they've had any training or development. I know
mm,
that might seem rigid, but 9 times out of 10, if somebody can't do that, that's not going to be a person that's going to give you an experience that you want. Now, I've had the opposite, where I had a client come to me and want a love reading, and I was very clear at the very beginning, like, look, this is who I am and this is how I operate. And she was like, okay. And so I did the reading for her, and that was not what came through was not what she wanted to hear. And so she was kind
mm.
of looking for somebody to be like, Mr. Handsome's going to come down and sweep you off your feet. And I was just like, well, I don't sense that you're going to meet anybody even in the next year. Like, here's some things that you could do, and here's some things as to what maybe that's really going on, which had nothing to do with a man or having a partner. It really had to do with more her, and where she was at, and why that was what she was wanting. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that was like, she just wanted somebody to tell her what she wanted to hear. And that's not, I don't come to me for that, because I'm not going to lie to you. I'll never lie.
Yeah.
So it's, and just even with those very few, which I think is setting a low bar for criteria for finding a reader, um, it's hard because there's so many people out there. And how do you differentiate? So I word of mouth is also really good. So if you know
Mm,
somebody that went to somebody and they had a great experience, go to that person.
mm,
I only grow my business from word of mouth. I do the minimal the type of social media that I do, but I do a very like you said, I'm different and I do a specific kind of work. And so, you know, I get clients by word of mouth because I think that that's probably the safest way to do it. But of course, to do that, somebody had to stick their neck out and come to me, for the first couple of, for the particularly the first year. But they should know how to explain the clairsenses to you. They should be able to explain the difference between psychism and mediumship. So if you find somebody and you think you like them, reach out to them and ask those questions. And
Mm.
they're hopefully be very happy to answer them. Never ever hesitate to send an email and ask questions. You'll know based off how they respond and treat you if they're ethical practitioners. Um, it's hard for those of us that are ethical to have a social media presence because our accounts get hijacked by scammers, which is another
Oh,
reason that I
wow.
don't put a lot of effort into having a huge social media presence, because I don't want to cast that wide net and I don't want my image being used in a way that's scamming people. So I've been very
Mm.
conscientious about that. You'll notice I don't have a ton of followers and I don't care. And when I get people that follow me, I go and look and see if they're real people, because I get weird things, bots, people that have stolen other people, and I block them. So like if it doesn't look like a real person or I can tell, block, 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 block. And that's kind of kept my space kind of clean, so to speak. Because I want, if I am on social media, I want it to be a safe container. Like I don't want
Mm.
that stuff in there. So I'm very diligent about that for those very reasons, like you said, just the scamming and the taking advantage of people when they're in a time of need. That's just, it's something that I really don't like about the industry, and it brings me a lot of sadness. But I just say, take the high road, walk the walk and talk the talk, and people will see. They'll see through that veil of, that illusion, and they'll find practitioners that will help them, because it is a very healing and supportive tool. It is. Like, I had my first tarot reading when I was 19 and it changed my entire life. And
Wow.
yeah, it had a profound impact on me. And I've obviously had at least one a year since then. And to varying, it's hard to find a good person, though. It's been hard for me, for myself, and it's certainly, I know that it's hard for other people. And I think sometimes people just want to have that mystical experience, right? Because it is kind of
Mm.
it's pretty cool. Come on, like it is. It's pretty miraculous, but that desire to have that mystical experience, sometimes we don't use discernment because of that need, if that makes sense. So it's
Yeah.
definitely, if you want to get readings, you need to be methodical about really taking the time to look and to find a practitioner. And I don't like psychic fairs either, because I just think there's just so much going on at them. And like, again, it's just a lot. It's a lot to sift through. And I don't know that you can. Do you want to be in a public space and have a very intimate experience in reading about your life where stuff might come up? I don't think that's creating a safe container. So I kind of like, um, I have feelings about that too. So, but you're right. It's a thing getting taken advantage of, and it's very unfortunate.
Mm. Another theme that I see as well is just fear. I know when
Yep.
I was first introduced to tarot, I had a lot of fear around it, especially
Hmm.
the death card, because I took
Oh
that
yeah.
literally. And I was like, I don't want a tarot reading. I don't even want to be like near this because, like, in my mind, I was like, what if something bad comes out? And I'm
Hmm.
curious, even with your experience in mediumship, like, I don't know. Are there things like evil forces that can come through, or like getting
Mhm.
messages of like, you're gonna die tomorrow, like,
Yeah.
like these things that we might just feel fear around that blocks
Mhm.
us from leaning into these tools. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. So kind of starting with the tarot, there are archetypes because the tarot is 78 archetypes essentially, right? So you have death and the tower, and I think like the 10 of swords. Like there's these cards that people are like, don't pull that one.
Yeah.
But what I would say is this. Life ebbs and flows and has challenges, right? And cycles of beginnings and endings in all the ways that that can happen. There are no bad cards. There's only our experience with them. And that's where I was talking about kind of coming to neutral with some of those archetypes is some of them do look kind of scary and what do they mean, right? So no, these tools are never going to hurt you. A practitioner could hurt you by the way they use the
Mm.
tools, but the tools are safe. The tools and spirit is never going to do or bring something up that's going to scare, hurt, or harm you. However, have I had readings with people where I had to have difficult conversations and bring awareness to challenging topics? Abso-freaking-lutely. And I always preface it by saying, this isn't to scare, this is to help you become aware
Mm.
of some things, some trends, some themes that you might just have to deal with because it's happening and you don't have any control over it. Or sometimes there's things where you do, right? Sometimes shit happens and it sucks. And that's the way it is. Would that come up in a reading where I would say to some, oh, I have actually a perfect example for you. I had a reading with somebody. It was really cool and it was a good experience. And then a week later, she got in a car accident. And she's like, Em, I have a question for you. Because I always tell people, ask anything. Like, my door is always open. Email me. I'm not going to be like, your session's over. Never talk to me again. I'm like, no, because I know people have questions about this stuff. She's like, Em, I got in a car accident. How come that didn't come up in my reading? And I was like, oh, that's really good. Thanks so much for asking. Like, that's a really good question. I said, if I had told you that you were going to get in an accident next week, what good would that have been done? Like, how would that have helped you? A, I didn't get that information, so I didn't get it. Like, I didn't get that. And B, like, then are you going to have a fear of driving for the rest of your life? Like, how would that be helpful? And sometimes things just happen. Like, right? I'm not all knowing. I don't know everything. I know usually the most important things that you kind of need to know and deal with in your life, but would predicting a car accident be helpful? So no. So that's kind of an example with kind of that. Um, it's normal to have fear around some of the archetypes. What I would say is if the death card is a card that scares you, is to work with it,
Mm.
to pay attention with it. It's a very, very profound archetype that has a lot of wisdom to reveal
Mm.
about your relationship to death, whether it be an energetic death, a change, an ending, and how you feel about maybe not having control over endings.
Whew, this is actually like I'm feeling that deeply, and
Hmm.
it's actually a question that I have for you is
Hmm.
how do what are your thoughts on embracing change with more ease and compassion and acceptance, whether
Mm,
that is an energetic death or a closing of one chapter and opening of another, or like a real death? Like,
yeah.
how can we kind of move through that with a little bit more
Hmm.
grace?
So before I answer that, I'll answer one of the other questions, which was about evil spirits and bad
Oh,
spirits.
yes.
That just won't
Yes.
happen. No, that's not a thing. And if, like, let's say you go to a medium and you have someone on the other side that you really didn't like and you don't want to hear from, you will not hear from them. And
Mm.
I know that there's, if like I worked in a place where I would hear footsteps down the hall. It's energetic footprints from like somebody that would always walk down the hall because the building was hundreds of years old. Like the energy can kind of reside there, but it's not exactly what I would call a ghost. So that's kind of my opinion on that. But looping back to your other question about sort of embracing change is what I always say to myself, this is where I start, is like when something's happening, where am I experiencing tension? How
In
is
your
that
body?
manifesting in, yep, tension or resistance? And then I feel it. Usually you feel it in your body. Some people will experience it with thoughts, but remember how like every thought, there's a feeling that usually precedes it. It's not easy for everybody to get into their feeling body and to notice those things. I want to point that out as well. We all come at this through different backgrounds and lenses, and that can be very hard for some people to get into their feeling body. It was very hard for me for many years, and I've had to work at it. So some people, they just do it right away. So I just want to point that out, that in and of itself is like a huge thing, like being
Yeah.
able to recognize, oh, I'm having a feeling, and I don't have to name it, but I can take a moment to describe it. Like,
Mm.
so usually with change, especially if it's change, like think about the change. Change comes in so many different forms. You know what I mean? There's little changes, there's big changes, there's one in between. There's when relationships shift, when you get a new house, when you choose to go to school. Like change so multi-dimensional, multifaceted. So you know, what kind of change are we talking about? If it's a
Mm.
change that we want, we're going to have a very different experience than if it's a change that maybe we don't want to be happening. Like my partner up and left me, and I didn't expect that. Like that's a hard change. Or somebody unexpectedly dies. That's a hard change. Or I just got fired from my job and I don't know what I'm going to do. That's a hard change. So, and we have physical reactions to that, like profoundly physical reactions. One of the things I like to point out to people's feelings hurt. Like, some
Mm.
feelings feel good, but some feelings literally hurt. Like, I've gotten news that made me so sick to my stomach, like I thought I was gonna throw up. Like it hit me that hard where I was like, ugh, like it just hit me so hard. It was a physical experience that resulted in just pain,
Mm.
tears, all kinds of things. But I think we're never gonna be able to avoid that, right?
Yeah.
And that's the catch. Like, I think people sometimes seek psychics to avoid these things. Oh, tell me the
Mm.
future so I can avoid XYZ. Then you get into ideas about fate and destiny, right? Well, you do have free will. We can change certain things, but some things are just going to happen. They just are. We don't get to bypass or avoid them. So, what can we do? We can accept it. We can accept that this is happening and it's happening to me right now. And how do I be with that? And that's where, you got to dive into what works for you.
Mm.
And most people want to run from change, even change they want. And I understand that. I get it. I do it too. And I think that that's more of the thing, is building a relationship to change in all the forms that it takes, and seeing how, like observing yourself from a really place of love and neutrality, like, oh, I'm not handling this very well, and being able to see that, or being like, oh, like this is something I'm actually more accepting of than I thought. But it just it's I don't always like to use the word mindful because I think it's thrown around a lot. I don't have a better word for it, but maybe it's thoughtful or moving a little bit slower so you do know what's going on. But again, a lot of people want to go fast. They don't want to think about things. And I would probably say that's okay. When you're ready to
Mm.
slow down and figure things out, you will. And I would never push anybody to do this work until they were ready, if that makes sense. And I do think you can do a lot of things on your own. You can do a lot on your own. Um, but it's really hard to do it all on your own. We all
Mm.
need community, and we don't learn and grow in the absence of others. We do it in community. And this idea that we can transform and change and grow in a silo as an individual is, I question that. I really, really
Mm.
do. I wouldn't know certain things about myself if other people hadn't kindly pointed them out to me. I would have
Mm.
been blind to it, and I needed um, that experience to come from another person to help me see and understand something about myself. Because I have blinders, blocks, and I'm like I've told you, like I bypass things. So change is a big thing. I try to meet people where they're at when it comes to that,
Mm.
and meet myself where I'm at when it comes to doing my personal work. And it varies pretty consistently. And do I have the secret sauce? I don't know. I think one of the things that is the most powerful things we can gift to ourselves or to anybody is our time and attention.
Mm.
Your time and attention is potent medicine, and it can heal you. Just it's like, you know, like when the other day I was noticing some fear, like we talked about how you had some fear too.
Yeah.
I gave it my time and attention. I was like, oh, I can feel this in my body. Oh, this is fear. And then being with that fear and thinking, what's it trying to communicate to me? Like, what's this feeling trying to let me know? When's the first time I've ever felt this? What are the circumstances around this? But being very curious about it and then asking, like, the fearful part of myself, what do you need? What do you
Mm.
need from me right now? And a lot of times it's like just for you to witness, to be here for me, and I just think to witness each other and ourselves is um it's sacred medicine.
Mm. That is so beautiful. It really is such a it's so tricky to navigate
Mhm.
change. It's been something I've been observing in my own life because on the one hand, I feel like I gravitate towards it, like different environments or different people and conversations or doing different things or whatever. Like it's so stimulating. And then on the other hand, I've been noticing, especially on an energetic capacity, how I've been holding on to older versions of myself because I don't know. I don't know. I imagine it's because of the fear. I think a lot of it, at least for me, is related to like what if people leave me, or like what if I lose people because
Mhm.
I'm different than who I was or who they
Yeah.
knew me to be. And
Mhm.
like that just keeps me
Mhm.
stuck
Mhm.
sometimes in evolving in who I am, or even evolving in my business, in the way that I show up in my creative work. And that's just been something I've really had to look at, because I think on the surface I've always been like, I'm great with change. Like I move
Mhm.
around all the time. I like do all these
Yeah.
different things on the surface, but then
Mhm.
underneath there's actually there can be a lot of resistance, and
Yeah.
not really sitting with it the way you're describing, to just like
Yeah.
even naming it in my body. Like I
Mhm.
actually have a hard time with that. I know that's something that I've had many people share, of like, okay, like close your eyes and feel where you're feeling that in your body. And I have
Mhm.
a hard time like being like,
Yep.
I don't know. Like I feel it. I don't know where. And
Yep.
yeah, coming back to I think what we talked about at the beginning, of that presence of like
Mhm.
being with the difficult emotions, is really such a like healing balm
Mhm.
to this like the resistance or the difficult emotions that can come up
Mhm.
with change.
One thing that it's helpful when we can't feel something in our body is to just notice our broader energetic awareness and to see, like, not look to pinpoint something, but just see in general where your energy feels like it is. Like, and in those moments, if it feels more up towards the head,
Mm.
because a lot of times if we don't feel anything in our body, this is probably very stimulated, and it's almost like a switch gets flipped. It's unconscious flips the switch, so we're not feeling. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like it's like a little it's
Yeah.
a mechanism. Some of it's just because of the way our brains are wired. Some of it's just like literally we were born like that and we have to find different pathways in. And
Right.
it's that's why I always tell people your way won't be like mine. We'll
Mm.
find your way, and we'll
Yeah.
take all the time that you need to do that. And you can
Mm.
try different things. There's lots of different things that people can try to help with that. And um yeah, because the feeling thing is tricky.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah. So, something that I'd love to maybe end on, depending on if
Mhm.
anything else comes up, but you, to me, come across, and I know that you've even studied creativity and art, but as such a creative person.
Yeah.
And you have spoken to how you use tarot and
Mhm.
psychism and
Mhm.
mediumship as part of your creative process. And I'd
Mhm.
love to hear how, like, how do you use these
Mm.
tools to support your creativity?
Well, one of the things that I've done is like I'm kind of I do lots of things. So like I write essays, I write things, I write my blog, I write poetry, but I draw, I do printmaking, I do all kinds of creative things. I'm a musician too. So I'm all over I'm all over the place. But one thing that I think is really fun, like um I I knew I kind of felt the inspiration to like write something, like I could feel it, but I didn't know what it was or even what the topic was. But like I get this feeling of like my of inspiration of being like, "Ah, I want to make something, like I can feel it." But it's sort of like, what to make? Like, what am I going to make though? And so one of the things I did was I pulled this was a prompt in a poetry group when they were like, let's write about death. And I was like, nothing's coming to me. So I pulled a tarot card, and guess what card I pulled? You'll never guess. The
The death card?
Empress. I pulled the
Oh.
Empress. So I was like, oh, so I'm going to write a poem about death inspired by the Empress. And I ended up writing this poem called Death, You Sexy Thing. And it's just like about how death can kind of be a seductive thing. And I was like,
Mm.
oh, that, and I would have never written a poem like that ever. And I really liked that poem. I was like, oh, this is kind of it's an interesting poem. And then I when George Floyd was murdered, I felt the need to make. We were all, in the pandemic. My whole life had changed. I had time on my hands. I felt so many things about that moment in time. And the image of the emperor from the tarot came to me, and I pulled the card out, and all of a sudden it just downloaded this whole image that I ended up painting. It's a mixed media piece, and I ended up showing in a local gallery for a show called Politics, the Art of Deception. And I put a black woman on the throne because to me, black women built this country. And so it wasn't the white man on the throne. It was frankly it's a black woman breastfeeding a white baby, draped
Mhm.
in the American flag. And it felt but it's all imagery based off the emperor card, and just like overtaking that image and claiming it for just in a new way. So that is a way that tarot has inspired my work. Almost everything I make is rooted in some kind of symbolic imagery and born of these powerful archetypes that we can all relate to, that are in every book, that are in every story, that are in every movie, that are in every song, right? These stories. And it just gives me a way to connect with them in a fresh way, in a way that I haven't done before, so that I don't tell the same stories, I guess, so that I break myself open and like, you know, see things in a new light, which can be which can be challenging. It challenges my perceptions, it challenges my skills as an artist, but I just let it organically unfold. I don't always know how I'm going to make something or what's going to happen. I just do it. What's the worst that can
Mm.
happen? It's like just sits there, fine, whatever. And it's just I feel like engaging our creativity is an extremely radical act, actually, because um, we're not machines, and being a creative person is it's not Chat GPT, right? Like we have to tap into something. What is it that we're tapping into? Like I don't know. I Is it spirit? Is it the collective unconscious? I don't know. But I like tapping into it, and I like letting it flow through me. It sure feels good, and sometimes actually it doesn't feel good. Like it will challenge me and my need to be perfect, or for it to like, have you ever made something you think it's going to turn out like this and you're like, it's going to look like this, and then you go to do it, it doesn't turn out like that? It's probably
Yeah.
better that it didn't turn out the way you thought it would, and because it's, you let it be what it is, like just let
Right.
it be what it is, and maybe it's not what you thought it would become, but that's totally fine. So all the time I use it all the time. And I, even though, like I said, for readings, I don't necessarily need tarot, I still use it and I still engage it as part of my spiritual and creative practices. And that's why, because it gives me these thumps to like try another way, think a different way. So I don't get, I'm very routine oriented. So I will keep things same. Like if something's not jostling me, so I have to intentionally like jostle myself. So that's kind of how I do it.
I love that. I love that as like a tool for inspiration because I've definitely been at that point. Today, I felt this urge to write and it wasn't coming through. And for me, actually, something that really helps is putting on a 30-minute timer and just
Mhm.
writing. That
Yep.
kind of gets me out of my head. But I really like this prompt or this invitation to look at the cards or the imagery or just what it makes you feel and use that as a
Mhm.
jumping off point or however it comes through. That's a
Mhm.
really beautiful way to work with it. Even your full moon and new moon intentions and affirmations that you share are so creative, and also in the way that you share it, like we mentioned earlier, it allows the receiver to also really cultivate their creative process as they think about the prompts and as they reflect upon them. So, definitely to any listeners, go check Emily out. I also recently joined your newsletter and I love it so much.
Oh,
It's so
good.
beautiful. Yeah, it's like it's so inviting and also like you're such a beautiful storyteller and it's interesting as well. It's not like a dry, like these are the intentions. It's like very
Mhm.
there's a lot of depth to it as I'm sure the listeners can even tell just by listening to this conversation. So, yes, thank you so much, Emily. Is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up?
No, this was such a great conversation, and I'm glad to have had the opportunity to do it with such a nice, kind, and compassionate person that
Aw.
is, that listens with intent, that's really listening. And um, because it does, you know, I'm an introvert, and I have had to make an effort to put myself out there in this way for a lot of the reasons that we've already talked about. So it felt, you create a really nice space for people to enter into the realm of having soulful and spiritual conversations about things that are nuanced and complicated.
Aw,
And
thank
it
you.
feels like a safe, comfortable space to do that. And that's also a skill, to be able to
Mm.
do that. And um, as I mentioned, time and attention is really all we have, right? Like that's what makes up our days. And so putting content out there that feels connecting, compassionate, and meaningful is a big deal. And I think it's just want to kind of acknowledge that I appreciate your work and I appreciate your interest in mind. And I feel like this was time well spent.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. That's that's such a beautiful reflection. I really appreciate it. And
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, these conversations are so helpful for me as well. There's so much I took away from this that I know it's going to be weaving into my life. So, thank you again. And where can people connect with you and learn more about your work?
Well, I think the best thing is at bloomingwand.com. So, like bloomingwand.com. You can sign up for my newsletter there. And if you want to connect on socials, they're there as well. And it's also a good place to just learn more about me and what I'm doing. Um,
Mm,
and my newsletter is where I put the majority of my time and attention.
mm.
So that's always going to be my primary focus, kind of for some of the reasons that we talked about.
Yep. Amazing. So all of Emily's info is going to be in the description bar. Make sure that you check her out. And just thank you again, Emily. Really appreciate it.
You bet.